Today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers on the Varsity Podcast Network is brought to you by Varsity Search. Varsity Search specializes in helping small law firms in Texas hire lawyers and build great teams. So if you're thinking of making a move or your law firm is looking to hire, please go to varsitysearch.com and book a time to visit right into my calendar. Varsity Search, building great teams. Hey everyone, Daniel here, back with you on Lone Star Lawyers. I hope you and your family are both healthy and safe. Now, before we get into this episode, I want to just take an extra few seconds here to remind you that you are always welcome to reach out to me for career advice, career counseling. You want to just get a sense of what's happening in the market, see what opportunities there might be out there for you, or even just have me look over a resume or ask a question, any of those things. There's no fee, there's no cost. I don't charge anything to lawyers for any of that kind of help or work. So I'm always happy to be a resource for you if that would help you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. You can go to varsitysearch.com/lawyers. And at the bottom of the page, you'll see a place where you can book a time into my calendar and we can visit. So I look forward to hearing from you. All right. Today, our guest is Shannon Quadros. Shannon is a partner and commercial trial lawyer at Kilmer, Crosby, and Quadros, a litigation and commercial bankruptcy firm in Houston. Shannon also serves as a mediator and arbitrator in Houston area commercial disputes and has been named a Houstonia top lawyer and a super lawyer rising star. Shannon is also deeply involved with the Texas Minority Counsel program, including serving on its steering committee. All right, with that, let's hop into our conversation with Shannon Quadros on today's Monday Mentors episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Shannon Quadros joins us now. Shannon, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, I want to start as we're sort of recording here on June 4th for people listening to it later and talking about what's been happening with regards to COVID-19 and obviously how that's impacted the workplace and law practice and specifically you and your firm. Why don't you share a little bit about maybe what these last, especially couple of weeks have been like, maybe as there's been some transition away from those first stages of kind of total lockdown and it's starting to open things up.
So it's been an interesting time, not necessarily for the change of structure of my firm. It's just that perhaps how we deliver services.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, between the multiple hurricanes that Houston has had and the just general, in Houston, about every 6 months, there's a major flood.
Yeah.
There's some shutdown or there's a storm coming.
Right.
And between us transitioning to be as paperless as possible, we switched to an almost virtual office system anyway to have it handy because we like the ability to be, we could be on a beach in Thailand and still send out an email. So about 2 years ago, we largely transitioned all our systems to the cloud. Actually, everything's in the cloud. Our phone systems, our email, one of the other things was also for security. If someone stole my laptop from my car or something, there's nothing on there. It's just a dummy terminal. Everything's in there. So functionally speaking, us not being in the office didn't really change anything except for the fact that if I had to do certified mails and for large print and scan jobs, things changed. But for most of my partners and I and my one associate, the only thing that's changed is that we don't get to visit with each other sometimes during the week and see each other. So there's some aspect of collaboration, but our functioning, our back office is really transparent to us. Nothing's changed.
Yeah.
Delivering services to our clients, getting some clients used to the fact that you're not going to see me. Not that we saw them a whole bunch to begin with, to be honest, but that a lot of things was going to be electronic. I was encouraging them already to scan things, but signatures or e-sign or docusign.
Yep.
And the fact that they are attending a hearing with me on Zoom, which was interesting for them.
Yeah.
Which I actually recommend for most of my clients if they insist on being there or if they have to be there to to specifically say, we're going to turn video off. You're going to be there audio only, just because it's one less thing I have to control.
Right. I'm sure those are some interesting conversations for sure. What about just in the way that the legal community has been transitioning through this, whether it be the courts and the judges or opposing counsel, the local bar? Kind of what have you been seeing here in the last few weeks?
I've actually been very impressed with the legal community, particularly in Houston, and even directives from the state about reminding everyone that lawyers need to do their jobs because that's how the democracy survives. And we may not think about it, but even it's keeping, we quite like highways and ports and roads and bridges, the legal system has to keep going. Otherwise, the country grinds to a halt, because we don't think about it even in terms of processing of payments, of transactional work, deals getting done, even sometimes if people have minor disputes, but allowing people to move forward. So getting that directive from the Supreme Court of Texas saying, hey, no, we are essential.
Yeah.
To other lawyers and judges also taking it very seriously. I had admittedly a rather curmudgeon group of attorneys on the other side of a case, but they unequivocally said when this came down, they said, we're not going to essentially put ourselves into if we're talking about depositions, saying we don't want to be essentially in a gas chamber with potentially sick people and without having to ask everyone, hey, do you have an underlying health condition that you could be at risk? They're like, no, that's just a terrible idea for everyone. And the fact that they said that and said, okay, we'll take our time. Let's slow things down here. Maybe let's just do a blanket abatement for 120 days so that no one's even worrying about it.
Right.
And they were so sort of congenial about it that made me sense like, okay, yeah, maybe we all need to take a pause. But again, some of this is client driven. If your client's having an emergency, it may not be so easy to do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And it's been interesting, I think, to watch lawyers and the bar and judges kind of really start to differentiate between, okay, what are the emergency items that need to still continue to take place and what can maybe be pushed back until we can have a little better grip over what's happening here. Well, is there anything you've talked about online hearings, maybe pushing back depositions as well? Are there things that you've learned in kind of practicing completely remotely in the last couple of months that you feel like is going to stick with you and your firm as you move forward, or maybe even stick with the whole legal practice moving forward, or maybe something you hope that'll stick?
Well, I really do hope we continue to do some of the Zoom meetings and even the telephone conferences. It boggled my mind, especially when you had discovery disputes, that instead of making the lawyers trudge down to the courthouse, we end up sitting in the courtroom for 3 hours, waiting till we get called as part of a cattle call docket, getting our 10 minutes and then going back, when I think it would be better, it'd be more efficient even for a judge to schedule a conference call time. Yeah. Everyone gets scheduled, we get on the docket, and then takes off the burden, even everyone going to the courthouse, parking. Yeah. I mean, I can't even think about just, if you're really a big tree hugger, the carbon footprint of that whole process. Right. Versus just the efficiencies, and even ultimately the clients win, because I sometimes have to go down for really a 10-minute discovery dispute. Yeah. And it's a 3-hour experience. Right. And it's 3 hours of my time. It's legitimately, I've got to sit there because they say 10 o'clock, you got to show up. Yeah. And I don't get heard till about 11:30, and I'm there, and then I've got to do some follow-up, and then I got to do a whole sort of debrief for my client, when that could have been maybe a half an hour billing to my client. And so I hope that courts will embrace using Zoom meetings for smaller matters, using conference calls for smaller matters, because I think it'll be ultimately more efficient. Yeah. And I think the clients, ultimately, if we're doing this, if our goal is that the clients are getting our best service, this actually does it's a direct tangible benefit to clients. And then I think also a better view of our profession, that we're just not out there to bilk them for all this time and money. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And it'll be interesting to see as we kind of turn the corner on this, what does stick around and become more typical moving forward. So, well, why don't you share with us a little bit just about your specific firm, your practice, who you represent, the type of work you do? Let us hear a little more about that. Sure. So I am a construction and real estate attorney. I primarily do construction real estate disputes, though I would say about 20 to 30% of my practice is somewhat transactional in nature, in the sense that I have some commercial clients who've got some complicated leases that they tee up and have me review. And particularly in the construction space, the drafting of the construction document between general contractor and owner, or owner and architect is actually, I think, much better viewed through a litigation eye, because there's so many pitfalls.
Yeah.
So that's roughly my personal practice: real estate and construction, 80% litigation, 20% transactional. I have two partners that do nothing but commercial bankruptcy. Yep. So, small, mid to small size companies up to probably maybe in the double digit millions. We probably couldn't take on, an American Airlines bankruptcy, but,
right.
But we can do some pretty sophisticated companies, particularly privately held ones.
Yeah.
And I have one more partner that is a transactional attorney, even though primarily in the real estate space, as an industry focus. She is a corporate attorney that does a lot of specialized formations, acquisitions, things of that nature. Yeah. So there's 4 partners in total, and we have one associate that does a little bit of everything that we give him.
Sure. Well, on the bankruptcy side of things, are you starting to see an uptick, or are you expecting an uptick as we're going through kind of this economic challenge and related to COVID and all of that, or is that still sort of a few months away to know kind of what shakes out? What are you seeing or expecting there?
So even pre-COVID, I would say for all of 2019, mm-hmm. my partners and I have been talking about the shoe's going to drop for retail. The shoe's going to drop for retail.
Yes,
and
right.
I think a lot of retail was hanging on for its dear life, and then the kill shot was COVID-19.
Yeah.
COVID literally finally was, a lot of them were just stringing along, but then COVID just finally was the kill shot. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of brick and mortar retail,
yeah.
And even some standalone companies. I think the New York company, which is a women's fashion house, just recently filed for bankruptcy. Things like that, brick and mortar retail. We already started to see it die, or this model's changing.
Yeah.
So we thought that was coming all of 19, and it didn't quite fully come to fruition until now. We also, with separate and apart from COVID-19 in Houston, oil and gas was already starting to see some numbers, primarily because demand had sunk. It was not a supply side problem; it was a demand problem, and there was just Russia, China, and India all had slowed down tremendously.
Yep.
Europe was in just this funny state because they hadn't figured out what Brexit meant, and realistically, the only economy in the world that was going was the United States. So demand was just nothing.
Yeah.
So oil and gas, even pre-COVID, was already feeling the pressure. And then, COVID was just, okay, a once in sort of, 100-year event that comes in and just adds fuel to the fire. And so, bankruptcies are being filed left, right, and center. I think, interesting enough, oil and gas has seen a slight bump up again.
Okay.
So maybe some of that stalled out, but I think a lot of the service providers of the smaller private companies that do things, unless they were smart with their money,
right,
are going to have cash flow problems very, very soon, and going to end up having bankruptcies. And I think really at the end of summer, we're going to see the real retail fallout, because a lot of them probably in Q1 are still riding the wave of the Christmas moneymaker, because most retail makes money in Q4.
Yep.
So, but they book their profits in Q1. So they've been riding on that. But I suspect from March, even April, probably late February, early March of this year to now, their incomes have dropped tremendously.
Yeah.
And so we're going to see, unemployment is sky high. So American consumers are not buying.
Right. Well, it's obviously a difficult time for everyone that's in those industries and across all these sectors. It's interesting you were talking about how retail was already kind of just hanging on, but then this was the kill shot. We were just talking, my wife and I actually were just talking about the movie theaters and how they were already kind of in that same boat because of how streaming and OTT, Netflix, and everything else was taking a lot of energy and spending money out of the theaters, and production companies and studios were already starting to put things direct onto Netflix, and then here comes COVID, and just doesn't let you go into the movie theater period anymore. And so now, article this morning about AMC not sure if they're going to be able to reopen, and so it's just wild how these industries that are already kind of struggling then just get hit with this double whammy. As we're talking here to lawyers, and one of the reasons I ask about it is, because one of the questions lawyers always ask me are they're looking for maybe a niche practice area to go into, and what's going to be a good area to be in. And so ask a bankruptcy. We talk about labor employment a lot and other things that are either on the horizon or just kind of always constant. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of what the legal practice is that rises up to meet some of these challenges.
I would say is that I think all of this has happened is actually both for any service provider or whether it's a lawyer, an accountant, or even any sort of product provider. Ultimately, the question we're having to ask is what sort of value are we delivering? What are we giving someone? And I think movie theaters, like you mentioned, is a good example, is that they were providing that big screen experience, but that big screen experience was starting to come at a cost. It was starting to come at a cost of like $10 sodas, and $14 popcorn for one person.
Right.
So if you're taking a family of four, say, to go watch a movie, that's a $50 or $60 exercise.
Yeah.
Versus, hey, I can get a pretty good experience at home with my big screen TV.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about, lines or somebody talking on their cell phone. And so that's diminished. And even for me, for example, in the movie theater, I would really only go to the movie theater to watch like a blockbuster epic, to watch something big. But I'm not going to watch a drama, in the movie theater. It's not comfortable, and it's not worth the effort.
Right.
So I think that's the same thing even with attorneys, as I think we're going to understand there are some aspects to certain practices or some ways we're going to do some things that are no longer going to be a value add, or clients are already going to start to complain about. Use of AI, for example, in discovery, for example, is that once our value add doesn't, what we're delivering to the client doesn't add up to how much we're charging the client for that, then you're going to see some forced change because the market is going to compel us to do something else. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about as we transition a little bit to getting to some advice to these lawyers in the audience, what's something that you learned as a young lawyer, kind of getting started in practice, that has stuck with you and is part of now who you are as a lawyer, and you would think it'd be good to adopt for a young lawyer kind of getting into practice?
Sure. And I think the number one thing I could tell any lawyer is start getting yourself out there and start business development early and often. And business development doesn't necessarily mean you're going out and pitching cases to pay, or pitching to get hired right away. But business development often is being in touch. I think for example, very simple. Your classmates are going to be some of your biggest sources of referral. My classmates probably account for 20% of my referrals. My classmates from law school. Yeah. Because every one of us did something slightly different. One of us, one for government, one did one thing, and the other. And within my classmates, I'm the only one that does real estate or construction related matters. And, so a lot of my classmates know to call me. And which is why they also, why I should always be nice to everyone, not just because we're business, but, that person who was rude or obnoxious in law school, guess what? They're not getting any referrals from their classmates.
Right. No, that's right.
And that appears in real life as well. And it's the same thing as well, is that, as a young associate, networking with your peers, because guess what? A lot of we have to admit, a lot of lawyers 10 years out are often not either in direct legal jobs or they're in-house or something different. They're your clients, or they're judges, actually. I can't tell you how many people I've, people I've known from my first or second year of practice who are now like a federal judge or a state court judge. Yeah. And so the fact of the matter is, someone when you're a young associate and you've got another, say you're co-counsel or opposing counsel on a case, and say you've got an associate from Baker Botts that's on the other side, there's a pretty good chance that in 5 or 6 years they're in-house somewhere. Yeah. And if you've connected with them, stayed in touch, you've been a pleasant person to deal with. Actually, if you made such a good impression that they were on the other side and said, "Oh wow, you did a really good job." Right. Those things, and so that's why get yourself out there early and often, and So business development, particularly for young associates, for me is establish yourself as someone who knows something about a particular area. Like put on a CLE, volunteer to go, even if it's at your local bar. Sometimes it's hard to get on the state bar conference and say family law and be the speaker. They've got some 20-year veterans out there. But I bet if you've got an interesting topic, your local bar association, whether it be in Austin or Waco or San Antonio or Dallas or Houston, is looking for a younger associate to put on because you've done the research, you've done all the heavy lifting for your summary judgment motions and what in particular aspect of law is. Convert that research into a 30-minute presentation, a few slides, and suddenly you're now the expert on X.
Yeah.
And that's how, getting out in front of people and letting people know you exist.
Right.
Is just simply half the battle. And doing that early and often. And I would tell every associate that, maybe in year one, learn the law a little bit, but year two, your goal is to try and be presenting or connecting with your peers as often as possible.
Yeah.
Because it takes 2 or 3 years for that to, to foster and grow. And so you plant a seed in year 2, year 3.
Yeah.
And, it may be that big case that gets sent to you in year 8, but that doesn't happen overnight. And I think because of that, that's sort of like in banking, they talk about the time value of money.
Yeah.
You have to put a penny in now and you'll only see the benefits, 10 years from now. It's that 10, 20 minutes now of effort will start to pay off in spades over time, rather than suddenly being this 8th-year associate who has 0 client base and suddenly has to now turn on the charm, and everyone sort of, feels like you're that guy at the bar at 1:45 in the morning,
right?
Trying to pitch, make a pitch.
Yeah, right. That's awesome. No, I like that investment analogy, because I do it, and they talk about how if you were to the advice is always to start as early as you possibly can, because you get all that added time value of money, as opposed to starting late and trying to put a bunch in. Like in a year or 2 or whatever it might be, like as you're getting closer to retirement or something like that. And I think it works similarly here, as you were kind of describing, and just kind of laying those seeds, letting them grow and continuing to water them and stay in touch with those people over that time. Like you said, it may be from year 1 to year 7 before anything really comes of it, of any kind of material benefit or whatever. But if nothing else, you're developing that relationship, that friendship, which has value in and of itself. But then also, it later times could turn into a case, or could turn into something else. And so I think that's really good. And then also on your suggestion related to presenting, I think one thing I've seen here, I don't know if you've seen this as well, like in our local Inn of Court is a great place. And where I think young associates, I've seen a couple do this. I think it's really a neat thing for them to pair up with a more senior partner attorney, maybe even from another law firm, but to kind of, like you said, the associate does all the heavy lifting, does all the research, puts together the presentation, the slides, but then you also have that the more senior partner to kind of bring credibility, to bring the crowd in or into it or whatever. And you get to develop that relationship though with that more senior lawyer as well over the course of that, and develop your reputation with them, as well as then the audience for that presentation. So I've seen that, I think, work pretty well also, and it goes along with what you're saying.
Absolutely. And I think even some small bar committee trying to take the lead on like a bar subcommittee. I will say I was on a bar subcommittee when I was probably a 3rd or 4th year associate. And then I did that, and about a year and a half later, I was transitioning jobs. And it was interesting is because one of my co-chairs, when I told her what I was looking to do, 2 days later, she said, "Shannon, here's the name of XYZ partner at major law firm. They're expecting your call. They would like to interview you." But that's partly because she saw how I had worked. Yeah. She had seen what I had done, and it's actually how you foster your network, because it's not just about cases. It's about opportunities. It's about people knowing, talking to people about what they do, or that the fact that they refer you to people. And people getting to see that, this is a person that's competent. Yeah. This is a person that's there. And especially I know inns of courts, at least in Houston, there's federal judges that are members. And getting that sort of exposure if having that sort of, guess what? Federal judges know some people. They know a few people, right? So if you're in a need, it's sort of being able to. I tell people, you never want to get a job or a case or something. It's really hard to do that when you're desperate for those things. That's why I think the day after you get a job, you should be networking like you need a job.
Yeah.
Because that is how not only do you find out about things, but then people also get a sense, then the pressure's off you.
Right.
You're in this position of, and so that's why it's just easier. And then you just hear about things. Because I think a lot of, this has been a trend for decades now. No one's in the same job for their whole life.
Right.
We have to acknowledge that you're not going to be in the same job for 5 or 6 years. Some longer than others. You may be in something for 10 here and there. Like I'm in private practice. It's my own firm. So, short of Tim Cook calling me and saying, "Hey, Shannon, come be the GC for Apple," I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
My partners we always talk about that story amongst us is like, hey, if the $13 billion hedge fund calls, I'm peace out. I'm seeing you.
Sure.
But apart from
otherwise,
that, no. But it's so this is why I think getting yourself out there, just so people know. I once taught a class, a CLE, on rainmaking for associates, and one of the things I said was, everybody should be able to say what you do.
Yes.
And if no one knows you, if your peers don't know you, whether it's even going, if you're in bankruptcy, if you're not going to that big bankruptcy conference and people seeing that you simply exist, you're going to be forgotten. And so that's why part of it is, that's why I like presenting, is because everybody's forced to see you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Versus when you just go in a conference and you have to mingle. But if you're presenting, everybody knows your name. Your name is actually printed on the brochure.
Right.
And that's why I like it as a very effective method of getting out there and developing your business and ultimately developing your brand as, there's XYZ person. They're the best tax controversy person in Waco. No one better.
Yeah.
And that's how you get clients, and that's how other lawyers even, again, 50, 60% of my work comes from other lawyers. It's not from what I call civilian referrals.
Right. Yeah. No, it's funny you mention that. I think one of the things that I hear a lot, and especially as I counseled law students in my prior role at the law school at Baylor, but even since in counseling lawyers, is there's this fear about being pigeonholed, right, into kind of one thing. And which on the one hand I understand, but at the same time, like you're talking about, the best way to stay in someone's mind in terms of referring cases to you is to know what you do. And if you do everything, you don't really do anything when it comes to a referral. And so if someone is going to refer a case, and it's a, white collar, whatever, they want to know who's the white collar guy in Plano or the white collar gal in Houston or whatever. And if you do everything, then you're not getting that referral. And so it's interesting how that seems like it's limiting, but at the same time, it's really broadening the opportunities to get those referrals.
I remember Judge Keith Ellison in the Southern District of Texas here in Houston. He's famous for asking. He often gets law clerks that will come and say, he'll ask them what would they like to do after the clerkship, and they say practice complex commercial litigation. And I remember him saying, what does that even really mean? and I took a cue from him. And whenever someone tells me that, I'll say, well, what makes it complex? And 9 times out of 10, they can't give me an answer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And Judge Ellison's famous for saying, well, who's going to handle the simple commercial litigation?
Right.
Because there's a lot more of that than the complex commercial litigation.
Right. That's really good.
And that's the same thing, is that I run into attorneys that will say, hey, I'll ask them sort of what they do, and they say, oh, I'm a commercial litigator. And my response was, have you tried the noodles? It just, because it doesn't leave me with anything.
Yeah.
Even if someone tells me, hey, very specifically, hey, I represent credit unions in issues. Again, I think credit unions is something sticky. It gives me something to remember them by.
Right.
But the irony of it is, I know there's the temptation to think that it will pigeonhole you, but I tell people I practice a very specific industry, but I get lots of other cases from that halo. People ask me if I do family law. I say no, but I will send it to my family law friends. Yeah. Who then, if I keep them fed, they tend to remember me. He's like, oh, there goes Shannon. He sends me one divorce case a month. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a wonderful, helping to feed other attorneys is
Right.
a wonderful way to get cases back.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very well said. So when you are going about the process of hiring an associate, what are some of the key things that you're looking for on both positive and the negative side? What are things that you're wanting to see? What are things that are turnoffs or things that kind of make you go a different direction?
Sure. So because my practice is still largely litigation based, I still look for those sorts of things.
Yep.
If I'm, being sort of non-traditional student myself, I was almost 30 when I started law school. I had another graduate degree in engineering. I do like to see some people that didn't quite go K through law school. I do like to see someone that has a little bit more, a more work experience. Because it reminded me of, I once had a conversation with a partner earlier on in my practice, and when I was an associate, and it dawned on me that he had actually never run a business in his life and had not dealt with certain things about certain taxes and things like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh goodness, he actually doesn't understand this is not what you're supposed to be doing. That's why the client, he kept on butting heads with the client about something. And I was like, oh yeah, because he'd only been in big law practice.
Yep.
So it's not like he saw the back end of business.
Right.
Everything was taken care of, like estimated taxes and payroll taxes and things like that.
Yeah.
And so I find, at least for the nature of my clients and the work I do, it is helpful to have someone has had some sort of work experience outside of law. It doesn't have to be huge, but having a couple of years working in business, just to also understand like dynamics of, because, the practice of law in private practice is not how people work in industry. It's very different. Like HR, we have actually, even though we don't think about it, even as associates, you have a lot of self-determination on what you're doing next. But if you're working for a mega corporation, Acme mega corporation, you get told what to do. You get these very specific rules. And so it helps if you're dealing with your clients to understand what they're dealing with, what they're going with, what's normal. So I look for people with a little bit of work experience, ideally, and I don't really need to see a whole lot others. For me, the other thing that it won't show up on the resume, but it can sometimes, is if I see some degree of hustle or someone that is that has done something that's they've taken ownership of, because ultimately in the end I'm not looking for worker bees. I need people to help me with things, but the goal is after about a year or two, I want to be able to just give them a case.
Yeah.
And ultimately them to be a good partner, so that in 3 or 4 years they're bringing in business because they're going to be bringing business and helping us expand the pie.
Yeah.
So if I want a good partner down the line in 5 years, I want someone that can ultimately have some degree of hustle, understand the importance of developing themselves. Yeah. And it's a double-edged sword, because if they're really good at if they do what I really want them to do, then they will not need me.
Right.
They will not need me. They will be perfectly capable of starting their own firm. But that's actually what I want, because I don't want them to need me. I want them to say, no, we want to stick around and be a part of your firm because it is the best environment for us. Yeah. But we don't need each other. It's just a bonus that, hey, if we work together, we just make the pie bigger instead of splitting the pie. And so those are the things I look for. Sometimes it can translate in a resume. Sometimes I don't see that till the interview, but those are the things I look for.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and also, I think it would be appropriate to just pause and mention, we're recording this on June 4th. We're kind of about a week or 10 days into continued protests in response to the George Floyd situation in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We're not going to be able to, in this podcast, in this conversation, deal with all of what's going on there. But I think it is a good time for us, in the context of this podcast, to talk about where we're at with regards to diversity in the legal profession, hiring of minority and candidates of diverse backgrounds, just all those things. Give us your thoughts on that subject and kind of where we're headed and where we might think about going.
Sure. So, particularly in Texas, and I know Houston and Dallas have been keeping metrics. I'm not sure about like Austin, San Antonio, and the others. I know Dallas about a year or two ago had come up with some rather sobering statistics that, despite efforts otherwise, their diversity numbers, after they did a survey of the firms in the Dallas metro, had dropped. And we suspected in Houston, with the Houston bar, though we didn't actually have the survey data, that our numbers would be similar, that diversity was not improving. It actually had probably gotten a little worse. So in terms of, I think for law firms, it not only is it the right thing to do it, I actually think it's the right economic thing to do, is because I'll use Houston as a wonderful example. Houston is one of the most diverse cities in the country.
Yeah.
If we don't understand or reflect our community, how well could we possibly be delivering services to them?
Yeah.
If there's, I was looking at the ballot, the paper ballot in Houston's got like 7 or 8 languages on it, right?
Right.
And so that means if it's big enough that there's enough sub-communities there that they had to put other languages in, are we actually leaving money on the table as law firms about not catering to these markets, about not providing services? And also, by that same token, we have to acknowledge that people live different experiences. And so if we don't invite those experiences to come to the table, we cannot actually we have a lawyer's creed to be, we have an obligation to be proficient. We have an obligation to understand the law and apply the law. And if we don't see how different people different from us think, and whatever different is from us think, then we're not able to do it. I think there's a famous TED talk about an African-American gentleman who sits and has dinner with Klan members because he believes not only do they benefit from him listening to them, but them listening to him.
Yeah.
And if we don't sort of engage, we're never really going to understand what's going on or what people have. And I think law firms, the legal practice has a long way to go in terms of diversity, because the fact of the matter is people of color and women in general are not very well represented as equity shareholders in lots of firms. They often, lots of women, I'll use women as an example, lots of female associates get hired, but by year 5, they're gone. And it's not everyone's the old, trite, they went off to have a family. No, maybe they went off and have a family, but they want to be right back. But they've also seen that this law firm you have is not a environment that caters to that or fosters to that.
Right.
But so I think more needs to be done even in terms of not only just mentorship, but actually sponsoring. There's studies that I think Harvard did about how they presented the same writing sample, but changed the name. One that would suggest someone that was an Anglo person, and one was some person of color. And they would present them, and sometimes they would send it to attorneys about 2 or 3 weeks and months apart. And the criticism of the writing was dramatically higher for people of color or women than they were for someone who was not. And that shows that there's these implicit biases, and I think firms need to understand that. They just assume someone is doing something, and I think that is all born largely out of, whether intentional or not, ignorance. Yeah. And so I think why this all matters in the long run is because these sorts of things are pervasive if we understand and we first recognize clearly what the killing of Mr. Floyd has revealed is that people of color get treated differently. Yeah. And not treated differently for a good reason. Right. Treated differently for a bad reason. Right. And clearly that the certain privileges that some people have, whether it's economic or not, get applied to one set of people. And, the law is supposed to be blind. Yeah. And so clearly is there a gap. And I think a lot of people were refusing to even acknowledge there was this gap. Yeah. I think that some degree of that acknowledgement of the gap is there. It's now, what do we do about it? Right. What do we do? How do we correct? How do we, and even just, how do we get involved? And I think part of that is actually acknowledging there's a problem. And I don't think anyone has necessarily this magic solution, but if you deny, accepting that you have a problem is you're halfway to that solution. Yeah. But if you deny you have a problem, you're never going to get anywhere. And I think we have to acknowledge there is clearly a problem. People have been screaming it from the rooftops. I think hopefully some people's eyes have opened now and they see, okay, all right, this is bad. This is not good. This can't go on. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for that. And I think that
and as we kind of move forward in the legal profession and with our lawyer clients and law firm clients and all of that, that within our sphere, and that's what I've been talking about the last couple of weeks, is sometimes the problem seems so big, it's kind of that what can I do thing, but everybody has influence over their immediate sphere, and wherever they go to work every day, and wherever they go to worship every day, wherever they go to school every day. And so looking at the places right around us can help bring it more into clarity in terms of opportunities to try to help be part of the solution to these issues. And so I appreciate you sharing those thoughts with us. Well, we're running short on time. This has just flown by, and I'm so grateful to have you be part of the show today. We've got some rapid fire questions here to close our time. If you're ready, we'll jump into that.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Awesome. Well, let's go with, okay. Name one trait or characteristic you most want to see in an associate.
Timeliness.
Good. Timeliness. What habit has been key to your success?
Networking.
There you go. Favorite app or productivity tool?
Evernote. All day.
Oh, good one. Yeah. Favorite social distancing activity?
Evening walks when it's not 1,000 degrees.
Yeah, we're about to lose that one. That's been nice during the spring, but we're about to lose that one. Lastly, favorite legal movie?
I originally was going to say Legally Blonde, but I'll tell you my actually truly favorite legal movie, which most people don't think is a legal movie, is The Exorcism of Emilly Rose.
Ah, yes.
Which is a horror movie, but the entire backdrop of this movie is a trial.
Yes. It's so interesting you say that. I want you to tell a little more about that to the audience, because I put together this master list of like every legal movie, because we're doing deep dives into legal movies occasionally here. And I saw that one on a list, and I have not gone into, okay, why is that one on the list yet? But I saw it and I noted it. So, tell me more about it.
Sure. So The Exorcism of Emilly Rose is quite like the name suggests, is a movie about apparently botched exorcism of a young girl in the Midwest. And ultimately, the young girl, Emilly Rose, dies. And so the priest that performed the exorcism is being taken to task and is in court.
Okay.
I can't remember whether it was a civil case or criminal. I believe it was a criminal case.
Yeah.
And what was fascinating, the good chunk of the movie is basically telling the story of what happened in the past, what happened. And what is so fascinating about this movie and why it's actually an excellent legal movie, and mind you, this movie is fantastically scary. Okay. It haunts me to this day. Okay. And I'll tell you why it haunts me to this day without spoilers. But the movie, what makes it such an amazing legal thriller is the prosecution presents it as a thing of neglect. And the prosecution says, Emily, you claimed that Emily was possessed, and you said one of the examples of why she was possessed is because she was speaking in foreign languages like Aramaic. Mm-hmm. And he said, yes, that was, and the defense was saying, yes, we knew she was possessed. But then the prosecution say, wasn't she a very religious girl? Didn't she spend time in the Holy Land? Couldn't she have been exposed to cultures that spoke Aramaic? She was very religious and deeply into religious studies. And so for every spiritual, demonistic argument they came up with, the prosecution said, but couldn't we have explained this by science? Couldn't we have explained it with, there was examples, and this is the thing that still haunts me. A lot of the shenanigans in this movie happens at 3 a.m.
Okay.
And the religious equivalent was the demonic twist on the death of Christ at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the cross. And so this was their ultimate. Sort of, I think, but they were saying, but it wasn't 3 a.m. There was a thunderstorm, and that caused the clocks to go on the fritz. Right. And everything. Why this movie haunts me is randomly I'll wake up at around 3 o'clock in the morning and I'll think about it. It's like, oh no, Emilly Rose. Oh no.
Gosh.
but this whole movie is the whole movie. What it just goes back and forth with. So what it messes with you and why it's, I think, such a wonderful movie is it calls into question both on one side, oh, I thought that was just a logical answer. Could it have been something more or something that I thought was sort of demonic or spiritual? Oh, there was a perfectly logical answer, and you're just torn. And it's remarkably scary. It is a genuinely scary movie.
Yeah.
But it is actually a wonderful, I think if you are a trial attorney to see, look, two people looking at the exact same thing, and we see this in politics today, can come up with completely different interpretations of it, and they could both be right.
Right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned it, and now I'm looking forward to it. So thanks for that, and thanks for, again, taking the time to come and be with us and share. I really appreciate it, and we look forward to staying in touch down the road.
All right. Thank you so much, Daniel.
All right. My thanks again to Shannon Quadros for joining us on the show today. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider doing two things for me? Would you subscribe so you don't miss an episode? And then would you also go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and rate and review the show? A number of you have started to do that, and we've started to see that, and I really appreciate it. So thank you for that. If you have any suggestions or thoughts about the show, or if I could help you in any way, please email me directly, daniel@varsitysearch.com. Also, don't forget, if you or maybe someone you know might benefit from just talking to someone in terms of career advice, career counseling, the market, any of those things, you can go to varsitysearch.com/lawyers and go to the bottom of the page, and there'll be a place for you to book a time there. I encourage you to do that. All right, that's it for today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Thanks again so much to each of you for listening. I'm Daniel Hare with Varsity Search, and we'll talk with you next time.